Jackson Reid, 48, lived in a quiet neighborhood of Austin, Texas. His home was a two-story building surrounded by a high fence and equipped with a surveillance system that covered the perimeter of the property. He lived alone, preferring a solitary lifestyle, although he maintained contact with a few close friends with whom he had once served in the Special Forces. Neighbors described him as someone who was always on guard, rarely appeared in public, and never engaged in lengthy conversations. Outwardly, Jackson looked significantly younger than his age. His physical condition was impeccable, which did not go unnoticed by those who saw him. Every morning, regardless of the weather, he went out for a 6-mile run. His route took him through a park and the streets near his home, and he never deviated from this routine. After his run, Jackson dedicated time to martial arts training, which he kept strictly private. Jackson worked as a cybersecurity consultant, helping companies protect their systems from hacker attacks. His home office was equipped with high-tech equipment, including several computers that he used for data analysis and developing security algorithms. Colleagues noted his professionalism and attention to detail. He never left devices unattended and always encrypted his files using complex codes that he developed himself. One of Jackson's most noticeable habits was keeping a diary. He recorded his thoughts and observations every evening before bed, but he did so in a coded format. No one in his circle knew the contents of these entries, although a close friend once mentioned that Jackson considered them an essential part of his daily routine. Jackson's home was equipped with a security system that included cameras, motion sensors, and an alarm. Access to the property was controlled by a guard who was on duty 24/7. Jackson himself always wore a watch with a GPS tracker, which allowed him to monitor his location and alerted him to any suspicious changes in his surroundings. Despite his skills and training, Jackson remained a cautious individual. He rarely trusted strangers, but was ready to help in a crisis. His friends recalled that he never left anything to chance and always had a plan for emergencies. Jackson was wearing a black t-shirt, camouflage pants, and black sneakers on the day of his disappearance. This outfit was typical of his everyday wardrobe, which he chose for its comfort and practicality. His lifestyle and habits pointed to a man who valued order, discipline, and security. It was these very qualities that made his disappearance all the more mysterious and inexplicable. On the evening of Jackson Reid's disappearance, the weather in Austin was unsettled. Rain had been falling since early morning, and by nightfall it intensified, accompanied by strong gusts of wind. Neighbors later recalled that the wind was tearing branches from trees and loudly slamming garage doors. Despite the stormy weather, Jackson stuck to his usual routine. That morning, as always, he went for his regular 6-mile run. His route took him through the park and the surrounding streets. A neighbor, Mrs. Harris, noticed him as he was returning home. She described him as focused and composed, just like always. Jackson was dressed in his usual workout attire, a black t-shirt, camouflage pants, and black sneakers. After his run, he spent time in his home gym, practicing martial arts. The day passed without any deviations from his typical schedule. Jackson worked in his home office, as was his usual practice. The office was equipped with high-tech devices, including multiple computers that he used for work. One of his colleagues, Michael Bradley, reached out to him via email in the afternoon to discuss details of an ongoing project. Bradley later reported that Jackson was in good spirits and showed no signs of concern. By evening, the rain grew heavier, and the wind became even more gusty. The security guard stationed at the entrance to Jackson's house noted that no one approached the property and nothing unusual occurred. He also confirmed that Jackson had not left the house after returning from his morning run. Around 10 p.m., Jackson was in his office, working at his computer. The window in the office was closed, but a neighbor living across the street heard a loud thud, similar to a bang. The neighbor assumed it could have been the wind knocking something off the roof and didn't think much of it. Later, he recalled that the noise was so loud it could be heard even over the sound of the rain and wind. The security guard at the entrance confirmed that nothing suspicious had occurred on the property at that time. He remained at his post, monitoring the perimeter through surveillance cameras. The cameras were functioning properly, and the guard noticed no irregularities. Jackson continued working at his computer, as was his habit. He was known for his attentiveness and discipline, and his friends later noted that he never left his computer on unsupervised. However, that evening, he remained in his office, focused on his work. Later, when his disappearance became known, neighbors and the security guard recalled noticing nothing unusual that evening. The rain and wind created noise that could have masked any suspicious sounds. The guard confirmed that after 10 p.m. he saw no movement on the property, and Jackson did not leave his office. Jackson's day had passed in its usual rhythm, with no deviations from his regular routine. He was focused on his work and showed no signs of distress. No one in his circle could have imagined that this evening would be the last time Jackson was seen in his home. When Jackson Reid was reported missing the next day, his office looked as though he had just stepped out for a moment. The computer was on, but the screen had gone dark. A neighbor who came by to check noticed this immediately. He also observed the window in the office. It was locked from the inside, but fresh scratches were visible on the windowsill, as though something or someone had tried to get in or out. The security guard on duty at the entrance reported that the surveillance cameras had stopped working exactly 5 minutes before the estimated time of the disappearance. The system was connected to a backup power source, and such malfunctions were extremely rare. The guard checked the recordings and confirmed that the last normal footage was captured at 9:55 p.m. After that, the screens went black and the signal did not recover until morning. On the floor next to the chair where Jackson usually sat lay a small metal object. It was discovered by the housekeeper who had come to clean the office. The object was the size of a coin, with a smooth surface and several small protrusions. She described it as part of some device but couldn't determine its exact purpose. Jackson's colleagues confirmed that he never left his computer on unattended. Typically, he would shut it down, power off the device, and lock the system. This time, however, the computer was still active, even though the screen displayed nothing. One of his close friends, a cybersecurity specialist, attempted to access the device but found that the system was locked with complex encryption. Neighbors recalled hearing unusual sounds that night. One described a loud thud, similar to a crash, that occurred around 9:55 p.m. However, they thought it might have been the wind and didn't pay it much attention. Another neighbor noticed a brief flash of bright light in the windows of Jackson's office, but couldn't say exactly what it was. The security guard stationed at the entrance confirmed that there had been no movement on the property after 10 p.m. He also noted that Jackson had not left the house after returning from his morning run. However, he couldn't explain why the cameras had stopped working at that precise moment. When the police arrived to inspect the scene, they found that the office window was locked from the inside, but the scratches on the windowsill suggested possible external interference. However, no traces were found on the outside of the window or on the ground below it. The officers also noted that there were no signs of a struggle or disturbance in the room. Neighbors and the security guard confirmed that they hadn't seen anyone suspicious in the area that evening. They did mention, however, that the rain and wind created a lot of noise, which could have masked any suspicious sounds. The guard also reported that nearby street cameras had not recorded any unusual activity within a several-block radius. When the police began their search, they discovered that Jackson's GPS watch was still transmitting a signal from the office. However, he himself was nowhere to be found. The computer, the window with scratches, the disabled cameras, and the metal object on the floor were the only clues that could shed light on his disappearance. The investigators began their examination of Jackson Reid's office with the computer. A cybersecurity expert brought in to assist the case noted that the device had been locked with a sophisticated encryption system. He mentioned that such encryption could have been set up either by Jackson himself or by someone who had gained access to the system. Attempts to recover the data were unsuccessful, as the encryption algorithm was too complex even for highly skilled specialists. The police inspected the window in the office. It was closed from the inside, but fresh scratches were found on the windowsill. Forensic experts suggested that the scratches could have been made by a tool used for picking locks or gaining entry into the room. However, no traces were found on the exterior of the window or on the ground below it that would indicate an attempted break-in or escape. The surveillance cameras, which had stopped working 5 minutes before the disappearance, were examined by engineers. They confirmed that the system was connected to a backup power source and that such malfunctions were extremely rare. The engineers found no signs of mechanical damage to the equipment or external interference with the system. The last normal frame was recorded at 9:55 p.m., after which the footage cut off. A metal object found on the floor near the chair was sent for analysis. Experts determined that it was part of some kind of device, possibly electronic. However, the exact purpose of the object could not be identified. Specialists speculated that it could have been part of a tracking, hacking, or communication device, but this remained only a hypothesis. Neighbors and the security guard confirmed that nothing suspicious had been noticed around the house. However, one neighbor mentioned hearing a loud noise at around 10:10 p.m. He dismissed it, assuming it could have been the wind. Another neighbor noticed a brief flash of bright light in the office windows, but couldn't determine its exact source. The search around the house and in nearby areas yielded no results. Jackson Reid's traces were not found in any of the possible locations where he might have been. The police checked his car, which remained in place, and found no signs that it had been used after Jackson returned from his morning jog. Jackson's GPS watch continued to transmit a signal from the office. Specialists examined the device and confirmed that it was in working order. The coordinates pointed to the exact location of the office, but Jackson himself was not in the room. This raised questions, as the device was attached to his wrist, and removing it without damaging it would have been nearly impossible. Colleagues of Jackson noted that he had always been extremely disciplined and detail-oriented. They found it hard to believe that he would have left the office with the computer still on and the watch still transmitting a signal. One of his friends suggested that Jackson might have found himself in a situation where he had to act quickly, but this did not explain the absence of signs of a struggle or violence. The police checked all possible routes Jackson could have taken, including his usual jogging paths and places he frequently visited. However, no traces of his presence were found. There were also no messages or records that could shed light on his disappearance. An examination of his diary, which he had kept in encrypted form, yielded no results. Cryptographers attempted to decrypt the entries, but the encryption method proved too complex. They speculated that the diary might contain important information, but access to it was impossible without the key. The key question remained: why did the GPS watch continue to transmit a signal from the office if Jackson wasn't there? Experts suggested that the device might have been left intentionally to mislead, but this contradicted Jackson's habits and skills. Another theory was that something had occurred that defied ordinary explanation. The search continued, but no new evidence or testimonies emerged that could explain Jackson Reid's disappearance. The police and investigators faced a dead end, where each of the few clues contradicted the others, making it impossible to construct a clear picture of what had happened. 48 hours after Jackson Reid's disappearance, his GPS watch continued to transmit a signal. The technicians who examined the device confirmed that it was fully functional and accurately sending location data. The signal pinpointed the exact location of Jackson's home office in Austin. However, upon inspecting the room, investigators found it empty, yet Jackson's GPS watch persisted in transmitting a signal from within the office. The watch was discovered on the desk, next to a powered-down computer. Experts noted that the strap had been neatly unfastened and there were no signs of damage to the watch's casing. One theory considered by experts was that the watch might have been deliberately left in the office. Specialists pointed out that Jackson, a cybersecurity expert and former Special Forces officer, could have used the device to mislead someone. However, this theory raised doubts, as no other evidence was found to suggest that he might have acted in such a manner. Jackson's colleagues emphasized that he was always extremely cautious and never left his personal belongings unattended. Another theory suggested that something had occurred that defied conventional explanation. Investigators were unable to find any logical reason for how the watch could continue transmitting a signal from the office while Jackson himself was missing. No traces of his movements or presence elsewhere were discovered. This contradicted all his known habits and skills, leaving more questions than answers. The police contacted the watch manufacturer to obtain additional information about possible scenarios in which the device could transmit a signal without Jackson's physical presence. Company representatives confirmed that such situations were highly unlikely and were typically associated with technical malfunctions, which had been ruled out at this stage of the investigation. They also noted that the device could not be remotely activated or deactivated without access to specialized software. 48 hours after Jackson Reid's disappearance, the GPS watch remained the only lead in the case. It continued to transmit a signal from the office, but no other evidence was found to explain where Jackson had gone. This fact gave rise to two main theories. Either the watch had been deliberately left behind, or something had occurred that was beyond ordinary understanding. Investigators continued their search, but the situation remained unresolved.